Your friendships are keeping you broke, not bad luck, not a broken economy. The people sitting at your table right now may be the single most costly financial trap you will ever walk into, and before this is over, you will understand exactly how to cut free without losing your mind or your identity in the process. The truth most people refuse to say out loud is that lifestyle creep does not begin with you. It begins with proximity. It begins the moment someone in your circle buys something unnecessary and you feel that quiet, almost magnetic pull to match it. Not because you genuinely want the thing, but because you fear what it signals about you if you do not have it. That fear has a name. It is called social pressure, and it is the oldest wealth killer in human history, more consistent than any market crash, more personal than any tax. Picture this. Your friend group decides on a restaurant, not because anyone is particularly hungry for that food, but because the place photographs well. You spend $60 on a meal you have forgotten by Tuesday. Multiply that by 52 weekends, and you have $3,120 a year spent performing prosperity for people who are simultaneously performing prosperity for you. Nobody in that transaction is actually winning. Everyone is spending to maintain the illusion that no one is keeping score, while everyone is absolutely keeping score. The samurai understood this not theoretically, but through the brutal arithmetic of survival. A warrior who spent his resources matching the appearance of his peers was a warrior who could not maintain his weapons, his horse, or his strategic reserve when the real campaign arrived. The pack looks like protection from the outside, but the pack has a price, and that price compounds silently, invisibly, year after year, without mercy or apology. What you will discover in the next several minutes is not a lecture on frugality or a list of spending rules. It is a tactical dissection of the hidden architecture that keeps intelligent, capable people financially paralyzed while surrounded by people they genuinely care about. The final revelation waiting at the end of this journey will permanently alter how you receive every social invitation for the rest of your life. There is a specific moment that every disciplined person eventually recognizes, and it hits differently each time it arrives. You have finally stopped spending on things you do not need. You have started moving your capital with intention, and your account is growing, slowly, but without interruption. Then someone close to you gets a promotion and immediately signs a lease on a car that consumes the raise before it even clears. And without making a conscious decision, you feel the pull to announce your own progress, to let people know you are also moving, also building, also winning. That urge is not pride. It is a trap wearing pride as a mask, and Yamamoto Tsunetomo understood its mechanics centuries before modern psychology gave it a name. In the Hagakure, Tsunetomo warned against the man who speaks before his deeds are complete, noting that the warrior whose heart is sincere in his undertakings will find that something extraordinary accumulates within him precisely because it remains unseen. The warrior who announces his strategy has already compromised his position, not because secrecy is a virtue in itself, but because visibility invites interference, and interference is expensive. What actually happens when you share your financial wins with the wrong audience is not celebration. The person in front of you recalibrates. Your discipline becomes an unspoken indictment of their spending choices, and their psychological comfort requires that you either slow down or fail outright. This is not a character flaw. It is a deeply human response to feeling implicitly compared, and it will manifest in ways that feel like friendship but function like sabotage. Bushido defined honor not through what a warrior owned, but through what he was willing to sacrifice in service of something larger than himself. Matching the lifestyle of your peers was not honor within that code. It was theater, expensive theater with no strategic return. Mori Motonari, the master strategist of the Sengoku period who consolidated rival clans through patient accumulation and calculated positioning, rather than visible displays of wealth, grasped this distinction at the operational core of everything he built. His teaching of the 3 arrows to his sons was fundamentally about this. Individual strength spent on performance fractures, what collective invisible discipline compounds over time. The threat, though, is not only external, and that is where most people stop looking. There is a phenomenon embedded in every tightly bonded social group that researchers have described as crab mentality. Watch a bucket of crabs and none of them escape, not because climbing is physically impossible, but because the others pull them back down without malice, without planning, without even awareness. Your inner circle may love you with complete sincerity and still participate in this dynamic because your upward movement destabilizes the shared story they have been telling themselves about why they remain where they are. The moment you begin pulling ahead financially, invitations become more expensive, the social pressure tightens, and the jokes about your savings start arriving. Always quietly, always with a smile that makes them difficult to name directly. The social structures you trusted as a child may be functioning as economic anchors dressed in the language of belonging. That diagnosis is uncomfortable, but the surgeon does not hesitate once the scan is clear. When you finally skip the trip, decline the dinner, and redirect that capital into something that compounds while you sleep, there is an initial sting of exclusion that is real and should not be dismissed. Then you check your accounts, and you feel something else entirely, something that does not fade by Tuesday. Tell us in the comments right now, where in the world are you watching from? This conversation is reaching every country, every culture, every economic bracket simultaneously, and that geography matters more than you think. Miyamoto Musashi wrote the Dokkodo at the end of his life, sitting alone after having given away everything he owned. He composed 21 principles not for a student, not for posterity, but for himself as a final accounting of what he had actually learned from 70 years of undefeated combat and relentless self-examination. The first principle is this: accept everything just the way it is. Most people encounter that line and read it as surrender, as a philosophy of passive resignation toward circumstances that cannot be changed. It is the opposite. To accept things precisely as they are is to refuse the enormous waste of strategic energy that denial requires. The person who cannot accept that their social environment is financially corrosive will continue funding that environment season after season because the truth of it feels too costly to face directly. The truth costs nothing. The sustained denial is what quietly empties the treasury. If the depth in this conversation is landing for you, press the like right now. It tells the algorithm this kind of thinking belongs in front of more people. Principle 5 of the Dokkodo states, be detached from desire your whole life long. This is not a call to want nothing or to achieve nothing. Musashi spent every decade of his existence in fierce, singular pursuit of mastery in every domain he entered. He was addressing a specific category of desire: the craving for external confirmation of your worth, the hunger to have your choices validated by the people around you. Detach from that precise appetite, and your financial decisions transform in ways that no budgeting app can replicate because you stop spending to signal status and start deploying resources toward outcomes that actually compound. In the mid-1500s, a samurai who displayed wealth openly was a samurai wearing a target. The strategic accumulation of resources was protected by deliberate simplicity and absolute silence about the size of the treasury. The warlords who survived and shaped the Sengoku period were not the ones with the most visible fortune. They were the ones who understood that visible treasure is a standing invitation to be invaded, and that the surest defense of accumulated capital is to make it effectively invisible to those who might be tempted to reach for it. Apply that directly to your daily reality. The person in your social circle who drives the newest vehicle, who posts every dinner and every vacation with a precision that suggests it is curated rather than lived, is not building anything. They are performing. And performance carries a brutal cost, because every dollar spent maintaining the display is a dollar pulled away from compounding, and compounding does not wait for the performance to end before it begins working against you. The psychological mechanism underneath all of this is worth naming clearly, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Your discipline makes you evidence. Not an argument, not a critique, but living proof that the spending choices your peers are making are choices, not inevitabilities. That is genuinely unbearable to someone who has spent years constructing an identity around the belief that they have no real choice in the matter. Your restraint holds up a mirror they did not ask to look into, so they pressure you, question your priorities, and frame your strategy as a symptom of something missing in you. If you are not aware of this mechanism operating in real time, You will eventually mistake their reaction for a signal that you are wrong, and you will soften the strategy just enough to stop its momentum. The void they are defending lives in their self-concept, not in your ledger. That distinction is everything. The ridicule, when it arrives, starts small enough to seem insignificant. A comment about how serious you have become lately. A passing remark that you are not as fun as you used to be. An accusation, delivered lightly, that you think you are better than the people who raised you or stood beside you through difficult years. None of this is random social friction. Every piece of it is a psychological defense mechanism executing exactly as it was built to execute, and once you understand its anatomy with clinical precision, it loses the ability to move you. People ridicule the savings goals of those around them because the saver represents a road not taken, a fork in the path that the ridiculer passed without stopping, and unexamined decisions are deeply unsettling to carry. The samurai response is not to engage the ridicule in argument, because defending your strategy confirms that it has penetrated your interior. The response is to cultivate such a stable internal foundation that the ridicule arrives and simply finds no surface to attach itself to, no wound to press against, no insecurity it can use against you. Bankei Yotaku, the Zen master of the Edo period whose teachings drew thousands precisely because he refused to speak in abstractions, described what he called the unborn mind as the natural state of human awareness before layers of conditioning settle over it like sediment over a riverbed. He taught that thoughts arise the way reflections appear in a mirror, vivid and seemingly solid, but leaving no residue when the moment passes. The mirror does not pursue its reflections or mourn their disappearance. It reflects completely, then clears completely, and that capacity to clear is what Bankei called the original nature, the thing underneath all the noise. Translate this to the architecture of your financial life, and the instruction becomes sharp and practical. The opinion of your social environment regarding your savings goals is a reflection in a mirror, temporary and substanceless. The moment you withdraw your energy from the pursuit of validation from people who are themselves cycling through the poverty loop, the mirror clears, and what remains is your original strategy, clean and uncontaminated by outside interference. Most people fundamentally misread wabi-sabi as an aesthetic philosophy, something about tea bowls and imperfect pottery, and the beauty of decay. At its philosophical root, wabi-sabi is the recognition that simplicity contains completeness, that the unadorned life, deliberately chosen and not apologized for, is not a consolation prize for those who could not manage more. It is the destination that only the most strategically clear people ever actually reach. Bankei's teaching breathes through this principle at every level. The person who discovers they need less to feel genuinely whole has built a form of prosperity that no social pressure can touch, because there is nothing visible for that pressure to target. The treasury is internal, structural, and silent. Epictetus carries this principle to its most actionable edge, and his voice belongs here. Building the fortress around your financial life is not an act of cold isolation dressed up as strategy. It is the act of an architect who understands that every structure capable of lasting was built on a foundation of decisions made deliberately in advance, not improvised under pressure in the presence of people who benefit from your hesitation. Financial boundaries are not emotional walls erected to protect a wounded ego. They are the strategic equivalent of a castle's outer perimeter, not designed to keep out friendship, but to ensure that the resources held within cannot be reached by forces operating through social engineering, guilt, or the slow drip of lifestyle inflation disguised as celebration. The disciplined warrior does not refuse the battlefield. He selects the engagements that are worth his energy and declines the skirmishes that exist specifically to drain him before the campaign that actually determines his legacy. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was born into slavery and achieved the highest order of internal freedom precisely because external freedom was never available to him, laid out the governing principle in the Enchiridion with a directness that has lost nothing across 2,000 years. Some things are within our power, and some are not. Within our power are our opinions, our motivations, our desires, our aversions, the entire interior architecture of a human life. Outside our power are our reputations, our circumstances, our physical conditions, and the opinions that others hold of us. The warrior who confuses these two categories will exhaust himself in battles he was never structurally positioned to win, while the territories he actually controls slowly fall into disrepair. Public opinion about your financial choices sits entirely outside your power. Your response to that opinion belongs entirely to you. This is not a comfort. It is a weapon, and Epictetus intended it as one. The moment you locate your financial decisions inside the domain of your own will, the pressure of external opinion stops functioning as a lever. It becomes background noise, still audible, but without the ability to redirect your movement. The automation of your economic system is where ancient principle becomes modern execution. The samurai who had to consciously recommit each morning to the discipline of training was a samurai who would eventually find a morning where the commitment failed. The samurai who built the practice into the unchangeable structure of his days removed the decision from the daily battlefield of willpower entirely. Automated savings transferred before the spendable balance is visible, investment contributions structured to execute without your intervention, these are not shortcuts. They are the structural equivalent of castle walls, decisions made once, at the level of design, that then execute silently regardless of what social pressure arrives on any given weekend. You never have to argue with anyone about where your money goes, because the decision was already made at the system level and is no longer a live debate. No negotiation, no visibility, no drama for anyone to insert themselves into. Hojo Ujiyasu governed the Odawara domain across decades of surrounding chaos by directing his energy toward the internal health of his domain's economy rather than the external performance of his power. He understood that the domain which looks formidable from the outside but is structurally hollow will fall the first time real pressure arrives, while the domain that appears modest but is internally administered with precision will outlast every opponent who underestimated it. That is the model. Not the loudest warrior in the field, the most structurally sound fortress on the hill. Yamamoto Tsunetomo wrote in the Hagakure that a man's whole life is a succession of individual moments, each one complete in itself, and that there will be nothing else to do and nothing else to pursue beyond living with absolute fidelity to the single purpose of the moment you are standing in. Most readers extract a message of urgency from this, an instruction to act now rather than defer indefinitely. The deeper instruction cuts underneath that surface reading. Tsunetomo is describing the architecture of a life built from singular, undistracted commitments stacked one upon another, not scattered across every social obligation, every invitation to perform, every occasion to display what you are accumulating before the accumulation is finished. The warrior who walks away from the social environment that is actively draining his resources is not being cold or selfish or ungrateful for the history he shares with those people. He is being honest in the most difficult and most respectful way available to him. The abandonment of what weakens you is not an act of contempt toward others. It is an act of fidelity toward the purpose you decided was worth building a life around. Tsunetomo understood that this fidelity, practiced moment by moment in the small decisions where no one is watching, produces outcomes over time that no concentrated burst of frantic effort can replicate. There will come a point, and you may have already felt its approach, where the distance between the life your discipline is building and the life your old circle is maintaining becomes too wide to bridge with occasional visits and carefully managed conversation. The relationship itself becomes structurally unsustainable, not because you stopped caring, but because two people shaped by fundamentally different daily choices, oriented toward genuinely different futures, eventually inhabit realities that no longer speak the same language. This is not tragedy. Though it can feel like one in the moment, it becomes undeniable. It is the natural and inevitable consequence of deliberate growth sustained over enough time to matter. Musashi called this walking alone in the Dakodo, and he arrived at that phrase not as a young man full of ambition, but as an old warrior at the very end of a life that had already settled every question. Walking alone does not mean walking in loneliness. It means walking with such internal clarity about the path that the absence of company in certain directions stops feeling like a loss and starts feeling like the confirmation that you are on the right road. The greatest freedom Musashi described after 70 years of combat, mastery, and self-examination was not the freedom to acquire without limit. It was the freedom to need so little external confirmation that the social machinery built to control you through desire and comparison simply loses its grip. Every system you automate, every boundary you hold without explanation or apology, every social drain you cut before it becomes a habit, is a single brick laid with precision. And bricks laid steadily, over months and years without announcement, become walls. Walls become fortresses. Fortresses become the foundation upon which everything you actually intend to leave behind gets built. You now understand the mechanisms. The traps are visible, the psychology is named, and the architecture of the alternative is drawn clearly in front of you. The only question remaining is whether you act on this before the next invitation arrives and the old pressure applies itself one more time before another year passes and the account reads exactly the same number it read 12 months ago. The warrior path was never contingent on finding perfect conditions or perfect company. It was always about becoming the kind of person who no longer requires either. If that standard of thinking is the one you want to hold yourself to, staying in this conversation costs nothing, and the compounding starts the moment you decide it does.